Hello everybody and welcome, good afternoon, and welcome to our live youth work conversation. Apparently this is number 10 of this conversation, so those who have been following all the way along, well done for getting this far. And this afternoon we're actually revisiting the theme of our very first one, if you can remember that far back in May, and we were thinking about intergenerational worship then. And what we're thinking about this afternoon is how does that still work? As we're starting to think about unlocking our churches, and how can we be sure to hear the voice of young people in that whole process? So if you look around, we've got some great guests here this afternoon, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask people just to introduce themselves, to say who they are and what they do, where they're from. So Ellie, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I'm Ellie. I head up a kids and youth ministry for St Chad's Church, which is in Romiley, which is just outside of Stockport, which is just outside of Manchester. So I am in charge of the 0 to 18s, and then when they become uni students, I tend to keep them as well because they're just too fun. And I looking after them on behalf of the church and with the church, which is the main aim of my role.
Ellie, thank you. Emily.
Yeah, my name's Emily. I currently live in Doncaster. I've just finished up a year on the Ministry Experience Scheme in the Church of England in Halifax in the Diocese of Leeds. And I'm also formerly what was known as the Church of England Youth Council. I am one of their representatives on General Synod. So ooh, I go to Synod.
Nice.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah. And Graham.
Hello, I'm Graham. I am part of the Children, Young People and Families team for the Church of England Diocese of Leeds. So yeah, working supporting parishes across West Yorkshire and occasional bits of other counties that we kind of encroach on and then run away quickly before they tell us off.
Brilliant. And my name's Andy Harris. I live and work in Durham Diocese, and I oversee the 11 to 18-year-olds in this part of the world. So should we pray as we start? Father God, we thank you this afternoon for this conversation, and we do pray for your wisdom as we think about your church, and we think about how we lead and how we manage and how we love and look after young people in your church. And I just pray for us and pray for all those who are watching, those who are listening, that you'd transform our hearts and our minds. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, if you were watching last week, you will remember that Susie set the bar really high, or actually perhaps really low. And she asked people, the guests there, to decide which different names were motorway service stations and which were cheeses. Yeah, we're not going to do anything similar to that, but I thought we'll just do a well-known scavenger hunt this afternoon, just for a bit of fun. So the rules are like this. You have 30 seconds to retrieve this item from somewhere around your house. If you're the first one back, you get 2 points. If you get back within 30 seconds with an item like that, you get 1 point. If you are late back, either with or without the item, then you get -1 point. Yeah, is that all? Oh, it's a bit harsh, isn't it? But so
do points mean prizes?
The points definitely means prizes, yes. But virtual prizes, of course. Okay, so now I just need a bit of a disclaimer here. The company, the show, can actually take no responsibility for any injuries that take place to any of you while you run up. But please don't run up and down your stairs. That would be helpful. Okay, are we all ready then? You might have these things at hand. Yes, Graham.
Can I just say for people watching this hasn't been pre-prepared. We have no idea what Andy's going to ask us, and I'm genuinely nervous.
And also, it's going to look a bit weird in the next few minutes because the screen's going to be almost empty of you three for about 30 seconds.
We'll have to have 30-second routines going on.
Yeah. I'll have to be explaining what's going on. Okay.
I understand that Andy has guaranteed that he's going to sing some of his favourite worship songs while we're off screen.
Nice.
Indeed. Okay, are we all ready then? Okay, yes. You might have these items hands. Right, you've got 30 seconds. I'm just going to get my stopwatch out here. Okay, are we ready? The first item that you need to get is a spoon. So just for those who are watching and just joined us, the three guests are trying to find a spoon in their house. Oh, first back, 2 points for Ellie. Oh, 1 point for Emily. And congrats. Oh, fantastic. All three back within the time. So Emily and Graham, you both get 1 point, but 2 points is Ellie on 2 points. Fantastic. Okay. Is everybody okay? Yes?
Yeah, I got a friction burn off my banister, but yeah.
I have just cleared the pots out of this room, so I'm gutted.
Somebody's cleaned your house in your absence, Emily. Okay, the second one. We were three altogether, just to warn you. Okay, the second one is a toothbrush.
Oh, no.
Oh, 2 points for Graham with the toothbrush.
Yes, for being upstairs.
Oh, this is getting exciting. Who's going to be second back?
I'd like to say that I have the other screen open.
Well
and
done.
I was so fast back, I got back before the lag.
Okay. So that is now Graham got 2 points for that one.
Well done, Graham.
It's a bit confusing. I wrote down E but there's 2 E's, of course. Okay. Okay, so it's actually 3 points to Graham, 3 points to Ellie, and trailing on 2 points is Emily, but there's still time to change. The last one, you need to find either a medal, a certificate, or a trophy, starting now. Oh, Emily,
yes.
2 points. Oh.
The certificates for my internship scheme were emailed to us so we could have our online graduation and all.
That is amazing.
So it's still there.
Oh, this is going to be interesting.
Empty hands.
Empty hands, put your back.
Oh.
Oh. Just back in time there. Okay, so that's one. Right, well, the scores are the doors. We've got first equal, we've got Graham and Emily both on 4 points, and we've got Ellie on 3 points. So congratulations. It's a tie. We're not going to do a tiebreaker. I think I've also wiped out our guests before we even start.
I'm going to go and close the door. 1 second.
Okay. Graham, can I hand over to you now, but you are absolutely exhausted?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I was just looking at my hand. Hi, everyone. So this week, I don't know how your lockdown's been or how it's easing. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe you have run out of scavenger hunts, or maybe you are still going large. This week's conversation is a follow-on from last week's, and also a throwback to our first week's conversation. Long time ago, 8 weeks ago, confusingly, for week 1, episode 1, we looked at what intergenerational worship looks like when church is online. You know, in a world of Zoom church or YouTube church, Facebook Live church, how are we doing intergenerational worship? How are we doing intergenerational church? So this week in our youth work conversation, we're looking at how can we continue that as lockdown eases, or how can we start that as lockdown eases? Thinking last week about what sort of church are we building as we go forwards? How can we ensure that the church we have is one where young people are able to participate meaningfully, where their voices are heard and heeded? So that's the plan for this week. If you are watching live and wish to chuck in some views, we will be trying to keep up with the comments. If you are not watching this live, you are still really welcome to comment. This is a conversation that doesn't need to end at 3 o'clock or just before on a Tuesday. This is a conversation that goes on. Indeed, this is a conversation that we hope churches across the north, across the world are having. Yeah. So let's start as our start question. What are the challenges? What are the challenges to intergenerational church as we reopen buildings? What are the challenges to intergenerational church as we reopen buildings? That's to anyone. These aren't angled. Any thoughts?
I mean, I'll start off. I mean,
yes, Emily.
For me, I've been thinking about the actual practicalities of everyone being together, and people, people shielding are still shielding. The risk of their health being negatively, really badly affected by the virus hasn't gone down. It's just the rest of the world seems to be waking up, so they're still going to be shielding and not able to participate physically, maybe. So that's really been on my mind.
It's also a very mixed picture. There are some churches that are very keen to be getting back into the building, other churches that are in no rush to do so. And also thinking about sort of junior church and other activities that might take place alongside church. There's a process to go through of sort of consulting the volunteers and the parents and the young people themselves about how, when, and where this will take place. So so that's going to take. And my worry is that sometimes the church might be keener to get back than the people who are organising, running the children's or youth activities.
There is definitely that tension, isn't there, between expectations and what we're able to do and what we want to do. I think one of the things that I think will be a real challenge as people approach what's the next step for their church is what we want to see in the vision and values behind a decision versus what's quicker to pull off. So if you're in a church where we can only, in the social distancing thing, we can only sit 35 in our building. So the easiest way we've always portioned each other off is in ages. But actually, if the vision is to work out how to be all together, then we're going to have to wait longer before we can use our building. So I think there's always going to be a challenge and a tension between making the choice based on our vision and our values and our timescales in the initial. And I think one of the exciting things about this process is we get to start again in some very real ways, which would probably make my personality go, I'll wait so I can start again in the way I want to carry on, not I'll just start and I'll modify, because that doesn't work as well often.
Yeah, and I suppose that leads kind of onto, I suppose, the flip side of that question, which is about the opportunities and sort of thinking about and rethinking church is something that is sometimes hard to do kind of when things are operating, to sort of being able to step away from that and think openly about what alternative shape or form that might be is, I think, can be quite tricky, because people just see what's there and go, well, yeah, I mean, it's this seems to work okay. And actually, this is kind of, I suppose, the great opportunity of this is that there's already a conversation going on about sort of like, how are we going to restart church? And so it's a kind of almost an open door already in terms of throwing into that mix of I'm mixing the metaphors now, of the question of how are we going to make this more intergenerational, or or continue it to be intergenerational. I know, say something, Graham. Have your churches been? Have you been? Would you say kind of your church has been doing intergenerational church well, not so well, during the last 2,000 weeks of lockdown?
I think for St Chad's, we call it being blended. So we've been exploring for a lot of years what it looks like to be a blended expression of God's family in Romiley. So sometimes that means that we're separate. We've got kids work and youth work and a traditional service and a more contemporary service. And looking at how, when we do things apart, we can get the best when we're together. So we've had quite a lot of thought processes on it, I guess. So in going through the lockdown and going on to, we do YouTube and then a Facebook Live, looking at how we can include people has been probably sort of in our mindset already. I think one of our challenges has been, it's really hard to fight that consumer feeling of putting on church. So when you're in your building and you can get people up and it can be a little bit more messy and you can just be a little bit more tactile with what you're doing, it's easy to feel like we're in it together. Whereas I think one of the things I've struggled with is feeling like, however much we want that, we're putting it on. You know, we're creating something. Ours is pre-recorded, and so that's been a challenge in how we do we've kept our 2 services, how we do our family one that meaningfully includes the whole church family. We've opted for, one of our biggest challenges was teaching. So we've opted for teaching that's more adult aimed, but only 8 minutes long. And then we have a going deeper talk that then adults can go deeper into, as you can guess, go deeper into it later, and then have home group style Zoom calls, so that the teaching felt meaty on a Sunday, but also pointed to more for those who wanted it. Yeah. Where we're at.
I suppose it is really hard to
go on, Erin.
Okay, to get that level of engagement. When you're sort of sat at home, it's all about the environment, isn't it? You know, you're sat at home watching it either on your laptop or TV or however you got it set up. Sometimes, some weeks you feel like you can't engage with the recorded sermon. You know, just something about that pre-recorded and to then, you know, have the option to go deeper if you want to later, or even to rewatch it and at a time when you feel like you can engage with it more. I think it's really helpful, actually.
Yeah. We're in a slightly different situation because my wife has just been started a new job as a vicar here, and so we've only been in the parish for a couple of weeks, so we don't really know what's going on as far as children and young people are concerned. But yeah, just from my experience of working with church up and down the diocese, there's a lot of young people are actually sort of watching things later in the day, and but they're not watching the live things if it's like 10 o'clock in the morning, but they'll engage with it but on their own terms and watch eating pasta at the same time or whatever. Yeah.
I think one of the things we found is that when you make choices that include, let's say, kids and youth, that may be your primary reason for doing something slightly differently, it actually helps everyone engage, and it means that the learning styles actually of adults are more satisfied, and it becomes more welcoming to people who are coming in. So you're naturally explaining a little bit more and keeping it a little bit shorter and a little bit more magazine style. And I think one of the things on my journey of going intergenerational is realizing how open to everyone who may be new or old to faith, actually the same choices benefit both brackets. So I think in that sense, online's helped us sort of formalize that as St. Chad's. How are we going to do that bit? So how are we going to hear the word all together in a way that engages everyone, as well as explains to those who don't know where the book of Romans is and what it's about and why it might be important. It's some good choices.
Yeah, and most sermons have actually been shorter as well. Yeah. Online sermons are shorter, which is great for everybody, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
You think if they can do it in 10 minutes, no.
There's a question in the comments about how long is an online service, Sunday service at St. Chad's? How long is your online service?
So we are aiming for between 35 and 45 minutes. We've intentionally shortened what we would normally do. A lot of my friends' churches, they have kept the full hour and a half. I'm not sure it would work for our church family, so we've shortened our format. So we've kept all the same ingredients, but are a lot shorter. And one of the ways we've done that is we've trying to perfect the art of an 8-minute sermon that then has a 25-minute extension outside of the service.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I was I'm really sorry because I can't correctly attribute it at this point in time, but I read something a couple of weeks back that was about somebody somewhere writing about the things that they'd learned about preaching in lockdown, and one of their points was about sermon length. And saying about keeping it sort of down to 10 minutes, because sort of and obviously it depends kind of what your church is like, so maybe kind of 10 minutes is long for your church or something, but I think they came from a context where the minister will talk for half an hour or something. And they were saying, like, you just can't do it in this environment. And there's all sorts of stuff about sort of Zoom fatigue and kind of how people engage, just for online meetings, like kind of in the work world, let alone for the church world. But yeah, having somebody speak, kind of keeping it shorter, which again, that kind of thing of being actually, that's something that could be more accessible for people of all ages.
Also, I think it equips parents. So if you've got, say, what you would consider an adult level talk, but if it's only 10 minutes, then most adults would be able to then pick up that one point. And, so we've got a 4-year-old. So the talk may not reach her where she's at, but actually I can pick off one point and be like, Richard was telling us about this. What do you think about that? And I think it helps us equip our parents, whether it's parents of teens or of kids, to take that one thing and have a conversation over Sunday lunch or wherever it is, to make it live. And I was listening to Rachel Turner last night. She is Parenting for Faith, and she was talking about anything you do online, actually try and find a way to do it in reality with your family. So whether you hear a really good quote or you love that worship song, or try and have that trickle back. And we're equipping our families by doing that succinctly in our services.
Have there been opportunities for there to be multiple voices in your services? My church kind of has done slightly different stuff week to week, but one of the things, we've had somebody in charge of the music group who sort of after the first couple of weeks of kind of like acclimatizing, has been sending out backing tracks to everybody in the music group for them to record to send their recording back, and then she patches it all together so that then we have a harmonious music for us to be kind of joining in with at home, so you don't have that wonderful cacophony of Zoom singing. And actually that I think it's really lovely, because I think that our church values that. I think that musical aspect is something that our church community kind of values highly. But also kind of really lovely to have those different voices taking part in the service, and it's sort of kind of make shifting that focus. It's not kind of all on sort of one person up front, which is not quite the same in Zoom. But kind of you see many more people, or we hear many more voices. Have your churches kind of tended to have quite a lot of voices in their weekly services?
Yeah, and it's something, there's something everyone can join in with as well, isn't there? I know at my placement church, part of the first thing they did after the welcome was light a candle, and it was usually one of the young people who went forward to light the Paschal candle, and they're still doing that. So we have videos of a child in their own home lighting a tea light, and then we go back to Rob and his standing room table. So that's been really good to see. And then as you say with the music, my home church, we all have there are 5 of us, and we have our instruments at home, or access to an instrument that we can record, and a wonderful, very talented sound engineer who pieces it all together, and we have almost as if it was in church music, and then contributions from different people, and new people as well. It's encouraged new people to have the backing track and sing, and we wouldn't see them in the choir usually, but they've we see their face on a Sunday, and it brings it back to, yes, this is a whole community of people who are watching and joining in. It's really nice.
One of the things we've tried to include with the people who don't want to read and don't want to necessarily produce stuff. So one of the ways we've done that, because like you were saying, Emily, we've done loads of those ones, and we've got some really confident people, but quite a few families who are like, not a chance. So we're not very liturgical at all. And we wouldn't have pre-lockdown said the Lord's Prayer all together as a congregation in our 11 a.m. service. But it was the first thing that was suggested that we added in, was every week we do the Lord's Prayer. So we can be saying it in our own houses. But we also every week have had people answer challenges or send in pictures. So we've done all our NHS workers did it in their PPE with like billboards, or we did a challenge. Could you make a line of the Lord's Prayer in food and stuff like that? So actually, even if we're not seeing faces of everyone, actually everyone's contributing, whether it's a VE Day picture or, so we've done loads, and that's been really lovely because then they've made something. if that makes sense. And we do it right at the end of the service, and it is the thing that keeps the kids in the room. They've made it through, and then they get to see what the church has done. So that's been an idea that, well, it's a God idea, because I'm not sure where it came from, but it's just blessed the family so much.
The Lord's Prayer, that's Jesus. That's where it came from.
Yeah, everyone.
Very true. I should give him credit. And he probably, to be fair, had the idea of us doing it every week in creative ways. So
we were talking earlier about how young people sometimes don't like to engage with Zoom because they have their face shown. So it's good that you can have a challenge, like a photo challenge, where it doesn't have to be of someone's face. Something creative they can do, and you know, they can almost, you know, send it in and be part of the community, but not have to have that vulnerability and insecurity about showing themselves on this big screen.
Yeah. Last week we actually did one, and we just did voices. So we did the Lord's Prayer, but using the Jesus Storybook Bible wording, so that one of those, everyone has to listen again because you don't know it. But I was able to scoop up lots of kids who haven't let me include them, and I was like, I just want your voice. So that was another one that worked really well, actually, because we had new voices, and everyone was obviously focusing on Jesus, but also trying to work out which kid it was.
Yeah.
That's really, that's really interesting, because I think up to this point I would have said that I was a big fan of live church, where people are able to, and I don't just mean stream live, but in terms of done live. And actually, that's a really, really good point about giving people that space and time, where then you can kind of, you know, in a big Zoom conversation or something, it'd be really hard to have people contributing just a word or kind of a really short snippet like that, and to then kind of move on to the next one. But doing something with pre-record and kind of advance notice gives people that space and time for them to offer, which then means their voice is involved, and obviously then that participation, woo, like in terms of, it helps make that accessible for people, and again, people of all ages.
I do attend a youth event normally in Durham Cathedral, and we couldn't do it in March, and so we reorganised it. We pre-recorded it and got lots of different churches and young people to send in recordings of doing prayers and readings and that sort of thing. And we didn't actually tell them a theme. They just sort of sent in different stuff. We put it together. It was just amazing seeing how they contributed. But the feedback we got afterwards was how whole families watched it together. And I think it's one of the few things and so when whole families are actually involved in their own living room in a service of some sort, that's really special, because you often don't even get that in a church building, because often the children and young people are somewhere else. Something we don't want to lose.
Well, so which helpfully, and I mean, to draw it kind of back to the earlier question in terms of, you know, are these things that you think you will be able to continue, you know, all these different things we've been mentioning, are these things you think will be easy to continue as we restart church services in the physical setting, or will they take some translation?
We've one of our challenges will be that our old traditional model was that we would do a blended 11 a.m. service once a month, so would be a slightly longer and more interactive version of what we do online, and then 3 weeks out of the month or the cycle we'd have 15 minutes together, and then the kids would go off. So I think it will be interesting to see how we edit the 45 minutes into 15, if that makes sense. So it would have been we always worship together, and we do an activity, whether it's a prayer activity or hungry hippos, a whole scheme of stuff, and learn something together before they go. So it'll be interesting to see whether things like the Lord's Prayer, we all come back to say that together, or I'm excited by all those questions. How do we rebuild church? I don't pray for revival, I pray for reformation. I'm like, we could revive it, or we could just totally reform it. So I think for us, that'll be a big part of how we balance. And do we need a different balance, having been blended for however many months it is now? Lots.
And Andy, Emily, have you got any? It's okay if not. I'm picking on you slightly, but any thoughts about how easy that stuff is to transition?
Some of it is straightforward to do that. It's just trying to, word that people keep talking about is hybrid, actually trying to retain some online stuff, and at the same time, it's good to be back together. That's something that we've already missed, and trying to sort of keep the two things together. That's going to be a real challenge over the next few months. But yeah, there's certainly things that we've learned from this that we want to keep as part of whatever we do, whatever it looks like, as we come out.
Earlier, Johnny said about starting again, being a lovely idea, and he said it's echoes of resurrection and new life. Jesus wasn't easily recognised on the road to Emmaus when he was risen. Will the church be recognisable in the coming years? Will it be resurrected? And there's that whole thing, isn't there, about resurrection, that it's new life rather than a restoration of old life, which I guess ties in with that whole thing about reformation rather than renewal. Yeah. But yeah, they're kind of real chimes in our Christian faith of sort of things starting up and green shoots, both as analogies and obviously, yeah. I was going to say kind of how it fitted in with parables, but that's kind of an analogy too. Anyway, right. So we've got this opportunity to think about church and kind of how we might carry stuff over or introduce stuff. But how do we do that? How do we listen to and involve young people in that conversation? If you've got a magic answer, please send it in now.
Yeah, at simple level, just ask the young people what is it that they value about worship and about the activities, and build those into it. What is it that helps them to worship? And rather than just sort of making all the decisions, the adults making all the decisions in the same way as they've always done in the past. I think that's key to it. Just talking to our children, young people, and making them feel they are part of whatever this is going to turn into.
I mean, it sounds so simple.
On you go, Emily.
It sounds so simple, but just listening and asking, and including them in on the conversation, and not just one or two of them either. I mean, I know there are churches with just one or two, and in that case, yes, include them. But each young person, like every adult in the room, will have a different view. That you're not getting the voice of a young person to represent all young people. Yes, it brings a young person brings a different perspective, but so does the one next to them and the one next to them. So all young people have something to offer and feel included. They should feel included by being consulted.
I think it takes from leadership a real commitment to want to travel together more than we want to travel the distance. So one of the things that I feel churches can sometimes make the decision to separate into different age groups because they want to go deeper, or all of these they want the adults to be taught at adult level and the youth to have their relevant thing and the kids to have their breakdown of teaching. And that's the value. Whereas I think actually leadership need to value being the family that God made us to be way before how far we go in our faith, or if that makes sense. And I think it's a commitment to only build stuff that is made of contributors. And I think one of the blessings, but also the challenges of big church, is we can become a machine that people could they could be a consumer of rather than a contributor to. And it takes the bravery to go, like Moses said to God, I'd rather stay here than go without you. And actually having adult leadership and our youth and our kids going, I would rather be together than do my own thing when we are family. And I think there's room to have kids work and youth work and adults, but there has to be that commitment. We try and teach our 4-year-old, mummy's learning right now, and how can you help me learn, even if that's just be slightly less wriggly for 30 seconds, low expectations. And the same with the youth. What can I learn from you, and what are you willing to learn from me? But I think it does take commitment from, at the moment, adult leadership is generally what our churches have, to go, I'd rather take you with me, youth. I'd rather travel together than I want to get my 45-minute sermon back, as an example.
I think sometimes we forget that just because we get older doesn't mean that we automatically lose all the other ways we learn, our learning styles, you know? Not some people, for some children, a 45-minute talk will be exactly what they need and they'll take it all in and learn a lot. But for most people, and even going into adulthood, that's not how you learn best. That's not how you engage best. So making it accessible to everyone means everyone will benefit from it and learn better.
I think one of the big questions is, why bother with Sundays? What's the point of our Sunday mornings, or our one gathered together point in the week, which may or may not be a Sunday morning? What is the point to learn? Is the point to experience? Is the point to be like? And I think for the churches that for them it's learning, intergenerational is a massive stumbling block. Those churches whose main aim to meet together is to encounter God's presence, which is much more intergenerational and tactile, they have an easier job of it, if that makes sense. So I think that's one of the big questions I would hope churches are asking themselves as they go from this stage into what's ever next is, what's the point of going back in our buildings? What's the point of having one time slot all together when we've all been able to download at different points? And, you know, I've been
thinking about this quite a lot, actually, and thinking about, well, actually, if we go back in history to when, you know, there were Sunday schools and you know, that was the main point of learning, and Sundays altogether the point was to worship and the focus was God, and obviously to learn as well, but less so. You know, do home groups come into this? Do we have, you know, intergenerational home groups, or even, you know, the age sectioned home groups to go deeper in learning? And then Sundays is where we come together and worship and do all the stuff we do together.
I think churches leadership needs to really focus on intentional sort of work with all people, and actually building on the relationships between the different ages, way ahead of in programs and things like that.
Andy, you work for a diocese, so like, how, you know, if a youth worker comes to you and sort of says, you know, like, I really love our leadership to prioritize this more, you know, what advice would you give them? I know I'm really picking on you there, and that has been mean, but like, because I agree with kind of everything that's been said about this. Like, there's been a question in the comments, like, I think it's kind of totally right. So, you know, how do we rally leadership to travel down a different road where we listen to children and young people? So, Ellie, you were talking about kind of how your church leadership were totally kind of on board with this. Like, you know, are there any kind of things, Andy, that can help start that conversation with the church leadership that you would suggest?
Well, church leadership loves theology, and it's got a theological background as well. I mean, all through the Bible, families worship together in the Old Testament times. I can't remember the exact reference to it, but there's a story of Joshua, and they're building the stones. And the children are asking, why are these stones here, or what do these stones remember? Something like that. And so you've got that sort of theological background to it. So Jesus saying the kingdom of God belonged to such as these. So I think any sort of presentation or explanation to leadership that this is actually key. And it's something that a lot of churches have lost in all the stuff they've done over the last couple hundred years, perhaps longer. So yeah, I think sort of just talking to leaders and actually trying to get them to understand where this is all coming from. This is not just a new idea, but there's actually something rooted right from the start.
I think also it takes sacrifice on the behalf of, I guess, ministry heads, if you're in a big enough church. Because actually, the church I'm in now and the one before, they weren't sold on the idea of quite how extreme my version of intergenerational is. And it takes being willing to let them have a say in where I'm in charge, so that hopefully over time I can have a say. So one of the things we've had to work really hard on is, I want to find a way that the adults learn and engage with God. I want to find a meaningful way that we can teach and train up our kids and youth in that. So if it's easily a song, so let's say there are songs that the adults love, I want our kids and our youth to learn them, because I would hope over time the adults would make space for the ones that matter to us. And one of the ways we've done that, so like youth saying, we're going to sing this song now because actually it helps me think about God in this way. And I think sometimes we have to let our defenses down, and definitely, and it might be just my experience, but definitely youth workers and kids workers I've worked in networks with, they've kept their walls up because they're in charge in their kids ministry and they're not listened to anywhere else. So they want to protect the bit where their voice is important. But actually that means that everyone's doing that. And sometimes we have to let our vicar or our pastor meddle in our bit, because actually we want it to become everyone's. Does that make sense? And that's really hard and it takes sacrifice. But actually I've seen real fruit in that.
I guess sort of like selling the vision kind of makes that easier as well, in terms of, Andy talking about sort of looking at the theology to sort of say, like, actually, if we kind of sign up there, then actually looking at the practicalities, although they may be challenging, are hopefully slightly easier because people understand that rationale. And Ellie, when you were sort of talking about Chester before, I was thinking about how what we learn about the Corinthian church, and that kind of encouragement for people to be willing to sacrifice some of their entitlement for the sake of others, and that's a personal choice, and kind of historically, that's sometimes been used in an oppressive way, saying, right, you need to sacrifice this, but actually that kind of needs to be individuals' choices. But if people see that vision and see what could be, then they're kind of more open to that.
And I think family, but in a family, that's what happens when you get generations together. They look for ways that they can do things where they all learn. If they're going to choose a movie, they'll watch sort of Finding Nemo or something like that as a family, because they'll prioritize the importance of actually relationships above their own particular personal needs or preferences.
Yeah, I think what will be interesting post-lockdown is we'll have some parents who are really keen to get rid of their kids for a while. But we'll also have adults in our congregations who've not seen a 4-year-old for months. And I think it'll be a really interesting dynamic to see that reaction when it becomes social distancing is all, the bubbles have popped, and actually our kids and our youth can go and talk to a different adult, and those adults can give the parents a bit of a break. And I think it could build some really great relationships and some learning how to be family. So much of our society looks at family as parents and kids. And I think where God is countercultural and church should be, is that that's not what makes up family. It's all of the gradients. And I think it'll be really great to see the new intergenerational friendships that come as a result of this and what it looks like. And I think little kids are really good at it, but actually teenagers are quite good too at going, I'm ditching you, mum and dad, I'm going to go and sit with Phil, or I'm going to go and sit with I think that's going to bear a lot of fruit as we look at what we do going forward.
Emily, just thinking about again, sort of, I suppose the practicalities of that, from your experience, sort of both individually and from representation roles, are there any particular things that you kind of common tropes in obstructions to hearing the voice of young people and young adults in our churches, in terms of for us thinking as a community about how we as youth workers can support young people? Are there any particular things you would flag as things to be alert to, aware of?
I think it does come back to listening to them and listening to all of them, and with that I think you've got to be really sensitive, because lots of different young people have different views on social media and Zoom calls. And if they're asked for their opinion on their own, they'll give you a different opinion to if you were having a group discussion about it. So that there's lots of things to think about including the young people, but including the ones who also don't do Zoom. And it's hard. There are so many tensions to it, but you need that discussion where they can also bounce ideas off each other, because they may be thinking, they want one thing, but then when they talk to, their friend, and, it sparks another conversation, and they can do, the thinking around it as well. That makes sense.
I think some children, some young people have actually really found their voice over this time. Some churches really enabled and encouraged that to happen. I don't think it's happened in all places. I know one church in our diocese where they've been doing 60-second sermons on Instagram. And some of the young people stuff, it's way, way better than anything that the adults are doing. And I'd be so sad if that just gets buried in the new normal that we come to.
I guess also allowing them to take a lead of their own, take ownership of their own faith and discipleship. Encouraging them and giving the tools to do it, but they can do the work for themselves. They can create the resources for each other. We've seen some great contributions of youth work from young people, with devotionals and leading youth groups and all the rest of it, and really built the skills over this time.
Thanks, Emma. That's kind of helpful, because I was just going to sort of wind up by thinking about that, the different shapes of participation. And I was listening to a little soundbite by Dr. Lucy Shuker, is it, from Youthscape earlier, and talking about participation and participation being really important. That's something we see in the Church of England, kind of rooted in the church report. That was one of the things that picked out, and that can look like different things in terms of people taking part in something big that lots of people in a church are taking part in, but also them taking the lead and stuff and being recognised and valued in that leadership. So I'm going to sort of, I suppose, unless there's anything else anybody wants to chip in at the end, I hopefully haven't missed anything significant from comments. I suppose a closing thought would just be to think back to last week, and I think it was Alex who talked about kind of being kind to yourself over summer and giving yourself space. I'm really sorry if I've incorrectly attributed that. But I suppose that's the thing in terms of when we're having this conversation, to have it in a significant way, but also to take our time with it, not to hurry it. Ellie, as you were saying, in terms of kind of walking at the pace of kind of people that suits, rather than kind of getting things done and leaving people behind. And I think that applies to this as well, that we take things slow, because actually let's give people the space to think and the space to work it out. Not least, obviously, because also guidance is being constantly updated. We now know that in 10 days' time we need to wear masks while shopping. So get all your maskless shopping out of the way now. Oof, no, please don't. That's terrible public health advice. But my take-home point from today's youth work conversation. Public Health England, bar me. No, but take your time over summer as you're planning. Be kind to yourself and have those conversations. Those listen to lots of different people, but also give yourself space over summer, so that as you reopen stuff more significantly, as churches kind of get into a rhythm, that you can do that well.
I'm not sure currently there's, there is a definite risk of people jumping back into doing what they were doing before and rushing the decisions. I don't think at the moment there's a risk of taking too much time out and thinking through. And, these are really hard questions. And, the church has been grappling with some of them for, thousands of years, and still not quite getting it right. But, the space and time and including everyone's views is really important.
I think sorry, go on you, Andy.
So this is I'm not going to say once in a lifetime opportunity, but it is an opportunity to do things differently. And if we don't grab this opportunity, then we can often just go back perhaps to the decline that we were in beforehand. But things have got to change.
Yeah.
I think so.
No, it's fine. I think one of the things that I'm most excited about in the next season is that commitment to only do what God's saying and only start back the things that God is saying he wants back, and starting new things the way he wants. And I think we've already talked about the fact that kids work, for example, even our midweek stuff is not going to automatically start in September. We're going to wait and see what the term looks like, and we're going to wait and have aspirations, but not let expectations either that we've got or other people make the decision for us, but actually to go back to that waiting on God, because we only get to start once. In that sense, we only get to start this new pattern once, and it would be better to have a bigger gap and start it right, and start it in tune with God's new plans than go back to an old pattern.
So thank you very much, Emily, Andy, Ellie, for your thoughts. Thank you for those who've chipped in on their comments during this conversation. Something that I would just want to flag up, it's not necessarily good for convincing church leadership as such, because it's youth work theory rather than theology, although I would totally back this up with theology. But if you've not ever checked out Roger Hart's Ladder of Participation, I would encourage you to go have a look at that, because I think that's a really helpful thing to look at as we think about how we can improve participation for young people. And as we've touched on here, and I think it's going to be one of the most challenging things actually to take away from this, is that's participation for all sorts of people, like children, but also, as Emily pointed out right back at the start of this conversation, for older people as well, because we want to make sure, if church is intergenerational, that all people are involved. There's been loads of conversations about during lockdown, kind of about what experiences of church like for those who struggle to leave their homes, for those with disabilities. And so actually, when we start to open that participation, I was going to say kind of worms, but that doesn't sound so nice. But when we start to open this, actually there's loads of stuff to look at, not in a daunting way, in an exciting way, because God's kingdom sings best. That harmony is best when all of the children get to take part in that chorus. If you want another event to look at this week, at the end of this week, Youthscape are running their What Next event online. If you sign up for that before Thursday lunchtime, I think it is, you get access to a free digital resource, but they're running that for 24 hours from 8 o'clock on Thursday night. We will be back here next week, same time, same place. But for now, thank you for listening. Thank you for contributing. We hope you have a lovely week, and do feel free to keep carrying on this conversation here and elsewhere. Bye.
Bye.
I need to put my toothbrush back now.